Name is Rob State, and I'm a trainer and technical assistance facilitator for what was NIAPRIS. We are now the Alliance for Rights and Recovery, formerly NIAPRIS. We're doing the Prince thing on that one. So welcome, everybody. So glad that you're here today. I'll just share with you that I have probably close to 15, 16 years of supervision experience in both the nonprofit world and the for-profit world. I know how challenging supervision can be, and working with the generations can also be challenging, but also very rewarding. I'm joined today by Chris Wilson. Chris, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate you inviting me to chat today. Hi, I'm Chris Wilson. I'm an organizational development specialist. I work for a nonprofit organization named Liberty Resources out of the Syracuse area. I have about over 20 years of leadership experience, primarily in human services or education settings, also as a leader in the military. Have worked with lots of different generations in the workplace, and I'm excited to talk with you all about that today.
And I joked with Chris prior to everybody getting on that we're just going to disclose straight out we're Generation X people here.
Gen X.
Gen X, yeah. But we'll be talking about many, many different generations that are in the workforce today. And I want to get started by talking about where we got a lot of our information for today's presentation from this author, Jean M. Twenge. Did I get that right, Chris?
That's the consensus, yes.
Yeah. She's written several books on generations, on what it means to be a Generation Z, Millennial, Gen X, those types of things. And this particular book did focus on, portion of the book focused on the workforce and what it kind of means for the future of the workforce. There are a lot of good takeaways. I would highly suggest that you pick it up. I got it here. It's free at the local library if you want to pick that up. Don't want to pay for it. Really good stuff in terms of information on working with many, many different generations. And this is some of straight from her book here, The Origins of Generation Realities. And so we've got many different generations that are in the workforce today. There are still a couple left from that silent generation, World War II and Depression era. But if you take a look at each one of these generations, there were significant things that happened during their formative years of growing up, or just formative years, period. And the author, Ms. Twenge, talks about the impact of the times that these individuals grew up and have lived, and how it affected their beliefs, their values, and their behaviors, specifically in the workforce here. So, Chris, I wonder if you can maybe take a couple of these generations and kind of talk a little bit about how these generations were impacted by the events that you see on the screen here.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick example. It's not necessarily workplace related, but if I think about, back to my grandparents who fell into the silent generation there, when they passed away and we went to clean out their house and whatnot, and you go up into the attic and you're like, maybe these people kept everything that they ever owned, right? That's a good example of, I think, a behavior that was shaped and originated from my grandparents lived through the Great Depression, right? So that's just a real salient example for me of the way that some of these events that transpired when we were, again, you said formative, sort of younger years and whatnot, shape the way that we see the world and the way that we then interact in the world, and sort of the expectations that we have about things. The Cold War, for example, you and I have talked about this as Gen X, right? I fully believe that if there is a nuclear attack, if I hide under a school desk, I will be fine, right? So, I mean, I don't know that that's true, but that's the way that we were taught when we were growing up, right? So that's the idea about how these world events will wind up shaping our behaviors and how we then interact with other people, and particularly in the workplace.
And each generation has a variety of factors here, as we're talking about, that has influenced how they behave or how they act in the workforce. And maybe one of the, if we go back to the silence or the baby boomer generations, those individuals maybe stayed for companies with companies working for one company for a long period of time in their life versus millennials or Generation Z individuals who don't have that mindset of sticking around for 10 or 20 years in the same work for the same company or working in the same type of a position. And it may be because maybe the bonds of that employer relationship was broken in some way, and so that is their mindset in terms of their workforce mindset there. A lot of it though also is technology. We
Oh,
all know technology has changed a great deal, but that also has impact as to how people work.
that's what I was thinking about when you were giving the last example about sort of sticking around and being in a career for a long time versus being more mobile. If you look at some of the things that we have up on the screen, first of all, air travel, right? Or just think about the improvements in tech and transportation in general. Back in the day, part of the reason that maybe you stayed with a company or whatever was because it wasn't as easy to travel around and do business outside of your immediate vicinity, right? But with the advent of air travel, people are able to do businesses in different parts of the country, in fact, different parts of the world. And as transportation increases in terms of efficiency and whatnot, you're able to do that same day business, right? In different countries sometimes. So that impacts the workforce and what people are looking for and how people engage. The washing machine up there is a good example of, back in maybe in the silent generation or whatnot, taking care of a household was largely believed to be a woman's role, first of all. And it wasn't as easy to do. By the way, it's my role these days, right? I'm the one that's most familiar with that washing machine at my
Okay.
house. Let me just state that. But and it wasn't as easy to take care of a household as it is now, because things like cooking, cleaning, and whatever took a long time without the technology to help it happen. Once microwaves and dishwashers and things like that come online, now predominantly female population is available to enter the workforce. And think about the advances that we've had in things like robotics and whatever that take this sort of traditional male role that requires strength, and we're going to use tools and whatever, and levels that playing field, right? So we have a whole new group entering the workforce as a result of the technology. And we don't really need to get into, we're living what computers can do for us today, right? And the way that we interact with each other, the advent of telehealth and all that stuff. And you just think about the immediacy that people have with computers in terms of information, access. If you and I are on, chatting on Teams, I can hit a button and all of a sudden we can see each other and talk. That wasn't available even in my parents' generation. My dad is a boomer and talks about writing his thesis on all of these cards that he had to feed into this computer that he said is about the size of a building, right?
Right.
I have a computer that I put in my pocket now and walk around with, right? So technology really does impact the way that we are able to work and the way that we expect to work.
And I would also add it's well, two things. First of all, younger folks tend to be more attuned to technology than some of the older folks, and I'm one of them. And I know that's a generality, but just this idea that technology has helped us to become more efficient at what we do. And I have a friend that's a Generation X friend, and she works largely for a company that has a lot of younger people working for her, working for that company. And she used to have this belief that the younger people, they weren't working as hard as her. And what she found out was they're just working more efficiently because of the technology that they have, the advantage that they have over her. Because she always used to say, Rob, what am I doing wrong here? What am I doing wrong? And she discovered it was the technology piece that was actually slowing her down. It's not that everybody else around her was lazy and not working. They were done. They were able to use that technology to get their work done a lot faster. And sometimes that's the elephant in the room when we're thinking, oh, the younger folks, they just sit around and do nothing. That's not true. They're using technology to become more efficient at their jobs. So the opportunity of a supervisor in that space is, what can we do to help that person learn more? Because they're learning at a faster rate than we've ever learned before. We're required to do that. And so some of the, that what I just kind of discussed is this idea of stereotypes that exist in the workplace about particular generations. So we'll start with generations, the Generation Z, that they're not loyal, or generation, millennials are entitled and lazy. And again, these are stereotypes. Even my generation, that we're, Chris already used the word cynical. We were kind of a cynical generation. Every generation has had stereotypes that have been used against them in some way or fashion.
Yeah, agreed. And let me just say that, stereotypes are developed for a reason. They don't just come to fruition um, out of nowhere, but it's important to understand that they exist, and that our default mode generally as leaders or people just in general is to fall into this trap of stereotypes. Is listening to the example that you just gave about your Gen X friend who's hiring younger staff that are working a lot faster. It's easy to jump into, well, these people don't have any work ethic these days and they don't want to work. I'm paying them for 40 hours and they're only doing 25 hours of work,
Yeah.
right? Everybody's lazy and whatnot. When in reality, what you discovered was they're more efficient than you are, right? It's not that they're lazy, but this, party line of nobody has any work ethic anymore, nobody wants to work in the younger generation is one of those stereotypes that we have to work to combat, right? Same thing when you think about, we were talking technology earlier, when you think about, move the other end of the spectrum, the baby boomers, some of the older folks and whatever, and these stereotypes that they're really rigid and they're not able to learn or adapt to current technology or whatnot. You have to be cognizant of those things because there's real impact to your ability to get the most out of your employees, or sometimes it becomes a barrier to even hiring folks.
Yeah, the stereotypes lead to bias, and that leads to somewhat of an action, whether it's favorable or unfavorable upon a certain group. But I think the bottom line is we have to remember that, taking these generational stereotypes is, we work with people who are individuals first. And in order to better work with individuals first, we have to be kind of aware of our stereotypes. And not only that, move past the stereotypes. And the way that we do that is through self-awareness. This slide here is from Dr. Tasha Eurich. And she talks about the difference between internal self-awareness. This is basically how we see ourselves, our own values that we have, our thoughts and emotions and those types of things, versus how do other people see us. And sometimes it's distinctively two different things here. But this is really critical in terms of working with the different generations, is understanding yourself. I know it sounds selfish to say that, but it really isn't. We'll do much better if we understand ourselves from our generation in terms of approaching other generations and their beliefs and values.
Well, you say it sounds selfish, but here's the reality, right? Is how much of any relationship that we're in do we have control over? Rob, if you work for me, I've got 50% control over that relationship that you and I have, right? And the control that I have is over myself. So when we start talking about like generational differences and whatever, particularly from a leadership perspective, it's usually a frustration about we're not seeing things the same way, and we're not, and people aren't doing what we think they need to be doing and things of that nature. The most control you have over that situation is developing your own internal self-awareness, right? And getting curious about things like, why am I so upset by what Rob's doing? Why is my first assumption that he's lazy? Why am I, and challenging yourself on that thinking. And might I add, without a whole lot of judgment, because that doesn't help us out a lot. Just get curious about what's going on inside you and why you're seeing the world. That's what I like about Dr. Twingy's, that first slide that we looked at, talking about, hey, there's real world events. So it's kind of a nature nurture situation. There's real things that have shaped people's behavior, right?
Right.
When I think about those world events and I think about the behaviors and attitudes and beliefs that people have as a result of those, it helps me take things less personally. Right now, I might be looking at your behavior, Rob, and not going, well, Rob's doing this on purpose and he just doesn't have a good work ethic and whatever. Now I can look at that from a different lens and say, let me try to understand how Rob sees the work and what his expectations are based on his life experience. Right. So it just helps me separate that out a little bit. But you'll never go wrong spending time trying to develop self-awareness and get to know more about how you react in the way that you think as a leader.
And I would add, the going the extra step of the external self-awareness and kind of recognize how people see us. There's a certain vulnerability on your part there where you're, asking people, you're getting feedback from people. You're kind of placing yourself in a vulnerable position there by asking that question and by getting that feedback. And maybe sometimes it's feedback you don't want to hear, but we need that feedback if we're going to change maybe some of our behaviors or our reactions to people and the generational realities that we see. It's a tough spot to be, but it's a necessary thing for us in terms of being able to be to work well with different generations that are out there. So when we talk about good self-aware leaders, all of these play a part here. A self-aware leader is open and reflective, considering of other different types of views and viewpoints. They're receptive of getting that information and feedback from other people. They're adaptive to other stances or other beliefs that people may have. They're willing to ask those questions. They're tuned into that individual. They are guided by a set of principles and values. That is their North Star. That is their guardrail in terms of how they work, so to speak. They're also future oriented. So they're looking really at the best in people. And they feel connected and they're responsive in many, many ways. Anything you want to add here, Chris, with
I'm going to just key real
self-aware?
quick that principles and values jumps out to me a little bit. I'd read recently a book by another psychologist named Adam Grant. He's pretty popular. And he wrote a book called Think Again. And he talks about the difference between beliefs and values in this book and how to position ourselves to be more open, right, to responding to others. And sort of, again, the title of his book is Think Again, right? But the difference between beliefs and values, he articulates, beliefs are sort of surface level type things, and they should be flexible based on the current facts of the situation. But a lot of times we wear beliefs like armor and like our own identity and whatnot, right? And so, Rob, if you and I don't share the same belief about something, now we're sort of opposed, right? That puts us in this sort of defensive stance and whatnot. And if that's how we're going to work with other folks, right? If I don't think you share the same belief as me about how this work needs to be done, then we're automatically putting ourselves in this position with other folks, as opposed to sort of leaning into our values, which are much more sort of foundational ideas. Let me just give you a quick example real quick. I managed group homes for a long time, and one of the group homes I managed was for kids. I had several staff struggle with the fact that the regulations wouldn't allow us to assign bedtimes to the children, okay? Because their belief was that children needed bedtimes and they needed structure and whatnot. And we had a lot of struggle around that. And I'll be honest with you, as a leader, some of that was me fighting and just saying, I hear what you're saying. You need to do what I'm telling you to do, right? We can't give them a bedtime, whatever, until you kind of learn a different way. And we get down to the fact that our shared value is that we want the best for these kids. We want these kids to be healthy. We want these kids to have a happy life, to do well in school, right? And so when we both can agree on what our value is, we can start from a different place and we can say, okay, we both agree that this is what we want for these kids. Here are the parameters that we have. How can you and I work together to make something work? But for the longest time, we just fought about our beliefs were different.
Right. You know, it's interesting when I think of a lot of these characteristics here of self-aware leaders. I kind of go back to that example of my friend working with the younger generation, where it looks like they're working 25 hours a week. And we may have staff that, you know, we're kind of thinking the same thing in terms of what we're seeing. But when we go deeper, we may recognize it's not a work issue, a work ethic issue, and it may be an issue where we're not challenging them enough. There may be things that we could be doing to challenge them, and or provide additional learning experiences for them. Or maybe you have somebody that you know, is constantly late coming in, or they seem really, really tired on the job. Well, maybe because they're working 3 jobs. There's always pieces of information that we don't have. Self-aware leaders are willing to ask more questions and get that information, so we're not making assumptions about people. Absent of information, that's what we do. We assume things, and you know, it's that old acronym. We get a lot wrong when we start assuming things, whether I'm assuming things about younger people or older people. It happens, and we want to kind of break out of that assumption, those assumptions, implied assumptions that we have for people.
Yeah, I just add there to that it's a natural thing that the brain does. By the way, it's a human thing. The brain likes to solve puzzles. And so in the absence of information, we're going to fill in the blanks, right? I've got a meeting right after this to address that particular situation, right? The brain just
Yeah,
does it. It's a human function, right? So being self-aware of that and understanding that that's how we operate as human beings is basically your first line of defense, is saying, okay, so I know I'm making some assumptions here, maybe based on stereotypes or whatever. Let me ask some more questions and get some information to kind of challenge that assumption that I'm making, right? And what I love
absolutely.
about this slide that you just put up here is once we can get past the easy answer, right? Like our brain also wants to compartmentalize things and put things in these easy to you know, labels. That's why we paint things with broad brushes and whatnot. Oh, you're a Gen X. I know what this means about you, because it's more complicated and takes more time to get to know the individual and figure out all the intricacies and whatever. But if you will do that, look at how many more strengths we were missing the first time we looked at this slide, right? We had blinders on when we were just looking and leaning into the stereotypes and sort of taking the path of least resistance.
Right.
But look at all the strengths that we were missing out on that folks can add to the workforce.
And every generation has them, you know. When we take a look at Generation Z, and again, I'm generalizing, but has a love of learning. They love to learn and want to continue to grow and develop in the job. I can't tell you how important that is today, because that's a necessity today. I can remember when I was working as a recruiter in a staffing firm in the late 1990s. I'm in Rochester. I would work with manufacturers who were looking for workers. And this was during a time when Kodak was downsizing. And I would have individuals who worked for Kodak come into my office, and they would say to me, Rob, I spent the last 25 years on the line working at Kodak. One thing I needed to do, I want to make $25 an hour. I want to work 7 to 3 Monday through Friday. I was the person that had to tell them, well, today you're going to make $11 an hour and you're going to be working all kinds of shifts. Here's why. The world of work passed them by. They didn't grow. They didn't learn. God bless them. They made some good money for a long period of time doing that one thing. That's not the way the world of work works today. We are expected to continually learn and grow and get better and develop new skills. Generation Z embodies that. They love that. And talk about a strength that really is needed in the workforce today. that is such a strength that that generation brings. Now, we could talk about any other generations. 70% of the organizations believe that Generation X are the best overall workers. I'm going to pat myself on the back about that one. Each and every single one of these generations bring strengths, and it's up to us is to help understand their strengths, help them understand their strengths, help us to understand their strengths, and developing that working relationship with them, that individualized working relationship with them. And here it is. It really is about the individual relationship that you have with that person. Now, I'm always talking, if you've been to any one of my trainings, I'm always talking about the relationship that you have with the people that you support, how important that is, how that's the number one way people get better. It's no different in terms of the relationship that we have with people that we supervise. We need to have meaningful relationships, nurturing relationships with staff, because they're doing the work. They're doing the work of the individuals that we're serving. And it is our job to engage and develop that relationship with that person. And we want to be, and I know, Chris, you're going to talk a little bit about this. We want to be intentional in terms of this relationship. So if you could kind of talk a little bit further about what that means.
Well, I like what you said, talking about this in reference to the folks that we serve and support, right? Clients or whatnot, because we are intentional about developing relationships with those folks, right? Whether we call it therapeutic relationship or whatever else, we're intentional about developing that so that we can do the work. Same thing holds true when we're talking about our employees in the workforce and whatnot. But we don't always think about it that way, right? We hire people that we kind of like and we think we can get along with and whatever. And then, if the relationship happens, it happens. If not, it's fine. They're a good enough worker or whatever. But you can really get to know folks and take the time to do that and be intentional about developing these things. And you can do it a few ways. I think we're going to talk about, what's the next slide? We got trust, right?
Yeah.
So this is the first thing that I think about when I sit down to work with a new person, is developing trust with folks. And that, I think, again, is an intentional thing. You can't have a good relationship or move forward with anybody. Nobody's going to grow with you or risk or do any of that kind of stuff that's necessary for us to get high quality outcomes from folks, or to help people realize their potential within their jobs, unless there's a foundation of trust that exists. Okay. And I think you can build that as a leader. These are, I call them the 4 C's of trust. Rob, I think you have a 5th C that you might add in a minute, but I'll just go through these really quickly.
Yeah.
And how I think about them, which is the first C is caring. And I don't mean that you need to give your employee a big hug every day when you come in and go, I'm just so glad you're here. But your employees do have to understand that you care about them as human beings, right? They're not just assets at the company. They're the most important asset, right? They're not just numbers. They're not just billing mechanisms for the company. They are people who need to be seen and heard. And the way that I always talk about it in leadership training is they need to know that you care about their success at the organization, that I'm here and I want you to do well. I hired you and I brought you into this company and I want to make sure that you do well. Okay. And so there's a lot of ways that you can do that. You can use positive reinforcement, things of that nature. But however, whatever your comfort level is with establishing a caring relationship with folks, that's step 1. People need to feel seen. Okay. Communication. If we're not taught, we just talked about it a couple slides ago. If we're not giving staff the information that they need to be successful, there's going to be gaps, and our brain's going to fill in. That's going to solve the puzzle, right? And they're going to fill in that gap. So however you communicate with your staff, they shouldn't ever be lacking for information, right? They should be hearing from you regularly on a variety, in a variety of different ways, both formal and informal. And there also should be sort of a 2-way street where they can kind of come to you, right? And ask those questions so they can challenge their own assumptions, right? We want to set up an environment where they feel comfortable coming and seeking that communication, which brings me to consistency. Right. And they talk about this as you can't, as a supervisor, nobody wants the wild card that they don't know. I don't know what version of Rob I'm going to get when I show up at work. This, right. That
Yeah. You don't
creates
want him.
anxiety. That creates anxiety for folks when you don't know what you're going to get. And it makes it hard for people to connect with you and bond. Right.
There's a certain comfort there too.
Right.
I'm comfortable in the consistency of the message that you're kind of giving me.
Well, when you know what you're going to get, right, your anxiety is lowered. And again, it invites people in when there's that level of consistency. And then competence is on the board. And when I say competence, what I mean here is just make sure that you can do what you say you're going to do.
Mm.
New leaders, I find a lot sort of over promise. They it's too vulnerable to suggest to my workforce that I might not know something. So sometimes I'll just say, yeah, I got it, or I can do that, or whatever. If you can't deliver on that, that's going to eat into your trust very quickly, right? So you're almost better off, Rob, you mentioned vulnerability earlier, kind of leaning into that vulnerability and say, you know what, I'm not quite sure how to do that, but I think we can figure it out together, as opposed to over promising and not delivering.
So the fifth C that I like to add is connection. I believe that people are interested in connecting in some way, whether it is connecting to the work, as you mentioned earlier, Chris, or connecting to coworkers or us as supervisors. There's a need out there for some sort of connection. Despite all the technology that's out there today, we are deeply disconnected in a lot of ways. So we want to connect with individuals. And I just take it right back to that relationship. It's interesting that I don't know if people have ever had the chance to be a part of a panel interview where we're interviewing one person and there's like 3 or 4 people that are interviewing. When that candidate leaves that room and the 4 people that are left that are discussing that candidate, I'll tell you what they don't say. They don't turn to each other and say, what do you think of their skills? No, they never say that. They turn to each other and say, can you see yourself working with this person? Again, that goes right back to the relationship. That is in terms of building that relationship right from the beginning. Now, we will develop relationships with a lot of different people because people are totally different in our workforce. And so this slide we added, we're talking about leading with this idea of being vulnerable or leading with kind of a humility stance in terms of working with a very diverse workforce generationally and in many other ways. So Chris, I'm wondering if you can expand this leading with humility.
Yeah, this concept of humility plays in when we're working on developing relationships. And by the way, these things I think apply to all of the generations that we're thinking about in the workforce. They may just look differently depending on the generation that you're working with, right? I can see when we're talking about the last slide, thinking about developing trust with an older generation. I had an employee one time who told me our relationship was, I give you 8 hours of my time and you give me money. That's it. Right. That's as much of a relationship as we wanted. So my approach to developing a trusting relationship with him looked a little bit different than some of my younger employees that I've hired of late, who are coming in and want to know about our social justice initiatives and where we stand on this and how I can get involved in this and what is Liberty's stance on this, right? They want to be involved and connected in a different way.
Right.
Okay. But all of the same things apply in terms of developing that relationship. The humility aspect for me comes in with the leader basically has to have enough, be comfortable enough to say, hey, you know what? I've lived my life and I've had my experience, and my life and my experience is not universal, right? It is not. Even you and I, Rob, we both identify as Gen X, white male. You know what I mean? Like we can fall into that assumption trap really easily with one another. just because of some of the things that we now assume that we have universal beliefs or experiences or whatever on things. And the humility piece is me sitting back and going, everybody I meet has something brand new that they can teach me. I mean, sometimes we talk about this as I like to think of it as I'm the main character in my story.
I love that.
Right. And we've gotten to chapter 9, and on page 334, Rob is introduced as a character in my story. Right. And I got to take to find time to figure out where Rob fits in, how much of his backstory we need to know or whatever. But guess what? I'm showing up on page 735 of Rob's story, which he is the main character, right? Two completely different stories. And so if we can visualize things that way, then that gives me an opportunity as a leader to sit down and go, you know what? I need to learn more about Rob's story. I need to figure out his experience, how he sees the world, whatever. Go back to those first couple of slides that we talked about as generations and sort of start to think, how does this person's life experience shaped the way that we're going to interact, that they're going to interact with the clients, and how do they see the work, right? And you do that by acknowledging, I don't know everything, and it's okay to ask and learn, right? And sit back and be vulnerable and say, I need to learn this stuff.
And it takes a certain amount of courage and confidence to be able to be in that spot where you're saying, I don't have all the answers here. Let's learn together. And that can also build that bridge of connection with that person. I don't know. Let's learn together. Let's find out together. That can be that building bridge of that connection with you, with that other person. And again, we're filling in gaps. We're filling in those assumption gaps when we're learning together. And I've been a part of that where, I've worked with individuals that we didn't know, but we took the time to learn together and get rid of those assumptions as well. Because the bottom line is this: the quality of supports and services that we deliver to the people that we serve.
Mm-hmm.
That is the bottom line. That is our North Star. And as a supervisor or as a leader, we're responsible for the success of others that are most likely or most aligned in terms of working with the person that we serve. And so that's our example, really. There's a person by the name of Simon Sinek. Some people may know Simon. But Simon says, not to be funny, but Simon talks about this person that he spoke with, that he asked the question of, who is your number one customer? And this was a CEO that he was talking to. And he said, well, my number one customer is the people that buy my products. And Simon thought about that and thought to himself, this person probably hasn't talked to an actual customer in 20 years. So that's not their number one person, or not their number one customer. It actually is the people that report to the CEO. Here's the thing. We have a company in Rochester. It's all over the state, Wegmans. People probably familiar with Wegmans. Wegmans is famous for saying their number one customer is not the customer, and their number one customer is the people that work there. Those individuals serve the customer. So they do everything possible to make sure that their customer, which is their employees, have what they need and the support that they need to better serve the ultimate customer of the people that actually shop there. I think that's important to kind of take in terms of how we work with people as supervisors. And some of it is about this mindset, old school mindset is a fixed mindset, pessimistic outlook, stagnation, low standards, underperformance. When people make mistakes, they are embarrassed by it. We try to avoid those mistakes, or we don't recognize, or we don't report those mistakes. It's the belief that we have that we're going to blame people for our mistakes, versus a growth mindset, which is one of optimism and hope, high standards for individuals, and belief that people can reach those high standards, that when people do make mistakes, they're actually valuable opportunities. It's not just a mistake. We learn from those mistakes because we get better as a result from learning from those mistakes. And when that happens, people take responsibility for those failures. They don't try to hide them. So we want to really gear toward this mindset of growth versus that fixed mindset for individuals.
Yeah, and I would just key when we're talking about seeing mistakes or failure as opportunities for growth, I'm going to jump us all the way back to that self-awareness slide that we were talking about earlier, because before you can set that tone for your employees and your workforce, you have to, as a leader, you have to reconcile yourself with failure, right?
Mm.
And being able to see it that way. Leaders, particularly young leaders or new leaders, are failure avoidant a lot of times, right? We don't want to look bad in front of the higher ups, or we don't want to make our folks look bad, so we just do it because it's easier, right? Or things like that. What you can expect, think about your direct reports or your staff as a mirror, right? And whatever you expect of them, they need to be able to see in you. So if you are failure avoidant and you fall into this fixed mindset column, that may be something that you need to wrestle with before you can actually have that expectation of your staff.
Good point, Chris. And I would add that, growing and learning means taking risks.
Mm-hmm.
It's not being safe. And Kodak's another good example here. Kodak, back in the day, had every single one of the patents that that Apple had and a lot of the other more progressive companies had, but they sat on them. They didn't take any risks. They played it safe, and they didn't grow and develop. And look at them now. It's the same thing for people. We want to encourage risk taking, and something in addition, we want to encourage resilience in taking those risks, because with every risk that we take, is every risk going to be every risk going to work? No. That's where, when there are mistakes, that we help people process that, we help people learn and get better as a result of that. That will lead to better services for most everybody that we work with. Now think about even COVID-19. When we had when COVID-19 came into being, that's everything kind of stopped. But we realized we couldn't stop. We had to keep moving. We had to keep serving people. And Chris, you and I know, and you've talked about this, it was some of the younger generation that had the wherewithal of the technology piece to still do the work. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit further about that.
Yeah, sure. So our company was doing or experimenting with some of the telehealth stuff that became kind of the standard during the pandemic. Prior to that, we had a contract down in Texas that we were trying to execute, and the clinicians were having trouble with no-show rates for these were adolescents that were living far away in 40, 50 miles from the office, sometimes out in these counties. And so the clinicians came to us and said, hey, these teens will get on these phones if we can do some sort of video conferencing with them. We could decrease our no-show rates and increase the amount of contact that we have with them. So we started experimenting with that, and then the pandemic hit. And as a result of sort of listening to some of the younger generation and saying, okay, well, let's give it a shot, we were in a position where we were able to flip the switch pretty quickly on telehealth services within about a week or two, right? We already had a lot of the trial and errors out of the way. We had learned from stuff. We even had some of the hardware and the foundational stuff in place. Now, that may not seem like a big deal until you look, and I'm sure everybody on this call can name a few agencies that existed pre-pandemic that weren't able to make this pivot, right? That might have been stuck in that fixed mindset, or maybe just didn't have the resources or whatever to pivot, right? And they weren't able to come through the pandemic as a result. And that's a loss of service, right? Our overall goal is always service and supports for the folks that need it, right? That's a loss of service in the area because we weren't able to pivot and have more of a growth mindset or think about different opportunities.
When we are setting the bar high in terms of expectations, we're actually telling the person, just by setting that expectation high, we're saying, we believe that you can meet this expectation. When we set the bar low, we're kind of sending the message that this is all, this is it for you. And so in both situations, there's a message that's being sent. Now, I believe that when we set the bar high, when we start to train individuals and help people along that process, we have to start where people are at. So because some people may have a harder time reaching that bar than others. That also goes back to the one-on-one relationship that you have with that person, of knowing that person a little bit more so you know where to start with that person. That's where that one-on-one relationship thing is so important.
Yeah, and let me just suggest real quick a phrase that I've used and picked up that's helping me, and some of it incorporates that humility and whatnot. But moving from this, I don't understand why you did that, Rob, to help me understand why you think this is, right? So I will admit to you, I'm 50 years old. I'm starting to get rigid, technology resistant, whatnot. I will admit that. But
Anybody?
When we have different solutions and things that are presented, I find that the conversation is a lot easier if I say, help me understand why you think this is a better solution than what we've got going on right now, right? Show me how this works. Same thing on the other end. If people are struggling with technology and whatever, help me understand where you're getting stuck. What does it look like from your perspective so that I can help develop a solution for it? So help me understand has been something that's helped me quite a bit in my leadership.
And that's a great question to ask yourself. That's that introspection. That's that question that leads to that introspection and those answers on your part in understanding people from their lens. So these growth mindset also consists of certain things that we do, which is praising for effort, praising for decision. Sometimes the decisions that we make aren't so easy. So just praising for that decision point is letting that person know, we really respect that you made that decision. Now, maybe it wasn't a right decision, and we'll take the time to learn from that. Although there are some decisions that we make that may not turn out well, but we always want, once we've had a chance to make a decision, or they've made a decision, we praise them for that decision and then talk about the outcome of that decision as well. We've talked about support from learning from failures, those high goals that we want to assist people in meeting, and just generally offering encouragement and belief that this person is more than capable of meeting the goals that they are invested in and that we have set for them as well. It really works on two different levels here.
Yeah, I want to go back and key on those first two, praise for effort and praise for decision, because I suspect there are leaders in here who have found themselves in the situation of, hey, my staff come to me for everything. They expect me to make the decision on everything, right? If they weren't here, if I wasn't here, they wouldn't be able to do their work, right? We create this kind of dependency. Sometimes we do that because we're not thinking long-term about creating this sort of level of autonomy, or even just acknowledging other people's perspectives or voices. You're gonna have that fixed or rigid mindset of, this is the way that we do the work. No, Rob, like this is how we do the work, instead of being a little bit more open to different perspectives. Praising the process, right? Reinforcing the fact that people are trying, even if it winds up being a failure, is how you're going to get more innovation, more creative outcomes, more initiative, more people looking and going, hey, Chris, you know what? I was looking at this the other way. This could be more efficient. If you continue to sort of shut people down, right, and not praise that and just say, no, I want you to do it this way, you're creating that sort of situation for yourself. And again, I will bring it back to like you have been doing, Rob, that stinks as a leader, right? That's a lot of frustration is whatever. But the main point is that compromises the quality of outcomes that the folks are coming to us for, right? We're not now getting the most efficient, innovative, creative, whatever solutions. We're getting what Chris thinks the work should be, right? Cookie cutter models of my one sort of myopic vision of how we should be serving people.
And it's the fresh perspective. I mean, like for some of us who've been in the field a while, it's we just do what we've done. We continue to do that because we've always done it that way. You know, one of the worst things that we could be thinking is because we've always done it this way means we have to continually do things that way. Younger folks give us a different perspective. People who've been in the field give us a different lens of maybe even questioning, well, why are we doing things the way that we're doing things? I think that's so helpful, especially Chris, in terms of the innovations piece that you mentioned.
And
Because
let me just add real quick. We keep talking about younger people bringing stuff into the fresh perspective. We now know in the workforce trends that there are older folks who have had entire careers, stepped away for a little bit, and now are re-entering the workforce with a renewed passion because of their passion for the work, right? There are also other elements. They need some paychecks and whatever. But there is knowledge and passion and experience coming in on both sides of the equation right now. So I just felt like we were skewing a little bit.
No, that's good.
The younger folks, but that's happening in the world right now, and we need to be open to it. I also just want your phrase about, hey, this is the way that we've always done it. That is a self-awareness red flag. When you start thinking that or hearing yourself saying it, it's time to step back and go, well, why do I think that?
Well, not to mention that some of the maybe the older folks maybe have worked in different industries, and they've pivoted. They've pivoted to our field. They also bring a lot of wisdom from other industries that may be valuable for us in our industry. So you're right, a lot of knowledge coming in. And we know as supervisors, it's always a balancing act, you know, in terms of the way that we're working. There's the stereotypes that we battle versus working with people on an individual level. There's the bias, the self-awareness piece. There's also the servant leadership versus direct style leadership. We kind of did talk a little bit about some aspects of that, Chris, but can you take us a little bit deeper in terms of the servant leadership?
For folks that aren't familiar with that, I mean, your Simon Sinek story was a good example of the folks that are looking at, hey, my most important job is the employees in front of me, right? Because if Richard Branson is a famous CEO for saying that, right? If I take care of my people, they'll take care of the customers.
Right.
It's that servant leadership mindset is, I am here to ensure that my employees have what they need to be successful. And if they have the resources and the training and the support and the guidance that they need to be successful, then the outcomes they deliver are going to be quality, right? And that's how I impact sort of the end user, okay? The direct style of leadership, right, conversely, is just, it's more about what I need, right? It's more about the outcomes. I have to report to somebody else about billing units and about this and about whatever. And so I need you to do this, Rob. I need you to do this for me, as opposed to flipping that upside down and saying, what can I do to make sure that you can do your job and that you're successful?
And I would say that it's the servant leadership role that really gets us to what I believe is our call to action, which is how are we better going to serve the people that we serve through the supports that we offer, through the programs that we offer, through the services that we offer. That really, as I said earlier, that is our North Star. That's how we, that's the end goal. That's the end zone, so to speak. And everything that we've talked about today in terms of this idea of managing the generations leads us to that bottom line question. All right, so we have a couple of minutes. We got 3 minutes left here. I don't know if we have the ability to take questions or not. Eileen, if you're still there, you could let us know if we can take questions or not. If not, I will go on to the final slide here. Well, thank you, Brittany. I guess Well, does anybody have any questions? You can put them in the chat box. We'll be happy to answer them. Hello, Karen.
Oh, thanks, Brandy.
I do want to let people know that we at NIAPRIS, that should say the Alliance, that we offered several other supervision trainings. There's strength-based supervision, supervision difficult conversations, developing effective staff through team building and collaboration, and transforming your program. In addition, the training that you just had, or the webinar that you just had, we will be further developing this into a standalone training. And as many people know, I'm one of 3 trainers for the Alliance that we come to your agency, provide in-person training or Zoom training, whichever you prefer. If you would like any additional trainings by us, our information is there on the slide, and the slides and the presentation will be available on our website real short order there. So we will get that out to you. So we're always available to train. I personally want to thank Chris. You've been working with me on this training for 9 months, and I joked prior to people coming on that we're giving birth today to this training. We have enjoyed the working relationship that we've had together, and hope that you guys got a lot out of it. It appears that you did based on the chat box, and take this information to further the work that you do on behalf of the people that we serve. And that's, like I said, that is the end zone. Chris, any final thoughts?
No, just thank you again for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to speak with you all today. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their week.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great week. Bye-bye.